Hello, welcome to the Teapot Reads. I'm the Teapot. This is what I'm currently reading, and I'm so happy to see you here today. Today we're doing my spring wrap-up, which is huge. I looked at the amount of books that I had finished this season, so this is approximately from, oh no, not approximately, it's from May. No. So this is covering the time from March till now. Today is the 26th of May, so the month is just about over. I don't expect to finish more than one more book this month, and in case I do finish it, that book is going to be One Last Stop by Casey McQuistion. Yes, I have an early copy. Yes, I'm loving it. It's going to be 5 stars. It's amazing. And I will definitely be giving it a full review because this book deserves it. But other than that book, I actually read 17 books this month, which is an incredibly high number, especially for me. And because it is so high, I'm going to try to go somewhat quickly through them just because there are a lot to get through. I'll give you a quick little synopsis. My thoughts, I'll have the star rating going across the bottom so I don't have to waste time saying it and I don't have to keep checking my notes on it. But before we get into the actual books, I do want to kind of talk about like some goals that I had for this month. I talked about them a lot in my spring TBR and reading goals video, which I'll post up here and also link down below. But basically the big goals were quality over quantity, which has kind of been my mantra for the year. Reading some more nonfiction, reading some outside, reading more diversely, and reading more classics. And I kind of hit these goals for the most part. When it comes to quantity over quality, when it comes to quality over quantity, I read 17 books. 10 of those were 4 stars or higher, which I think is pretty good. A 4-star book for me typically translates to, I would recommend this to people. 4.5 is like, I really love this. I wouldn't mind having more than one edition of it. And 5 star is like, absolutely loved it. One of my new favorites kind of situation. 2 of them were about 3.5 stars. I know 3 stars is like the true middle of the road when it comes to like the 5-star system. But for me, it's a lot more honest to be like, yeah, 3.5 stars are books that I feel very middle of the road about. 3-star books tend to have disappointed me at least greatly in one way. So there were 2 3.5-star books. And then there were 5 3-star or lower books, and they were all Bridgerton books. And yes, I know I have to keep reminding myself it's okay to DNF stuff, but at this point I have 3 Bridgerton books, or 4 if you count the like extra with the epilogues. 4 Bridgerton books left. I really want to finish because I am doing a couple videos about these books, and I'm doing it for content. But they're kind of miserable. If I wasn't doing it for content and if I didn't already own the entire series, I probably would have given up a long time ago. As for reading nonfiction, I didn't get any done. I've picked up a couple different nonfiction books, but I just haven't had the opportunity to actually read them. Also, if you hear dog noises in the back, that's Tank. He's sitting on the chair over there and he's just rediscovered his tail, so he's growling at it. Reading outside is a less easy to like keep track of goal, you know, in the same way that like, oh yeah, I read like this many books, because I didn't keep track of how many days or how many hours I read outside. I did do a lot of reading outside, especially when we just got Tank because he needed to be potty trained, and so I would sit out there with him for like an hour at a time and just read while he was exploring and learning to pee outside and whatnot. Since then, it's gotten really, really hot and humid out. It kind of feels like it's like summer already, even though it's only late May, and it's low-key miserable to be reading outside. So I just haven't been. I do want to do it more because I legitimately do enjoy it, and I'm starting to deal with my fear of insects. I do want to read more outside, and I think the key to this is going to be timing, finding those days that don't have as much humidity, and also reading outside when it's still early enough that the sun hasn't really like taken its toll on the earth. I do also want to, like, in general, my goal this whole year has been to get out more and do more, and as of today I am fully vaxxed, which is super exciting. So I will probably start going to like local parks. There's a river nearby, maybe go hanging out near there. Also the Arboretum, which I love, and trying to do some reading at those places. I hope that maybe change of scenery will also help get me like more invested in reading outside. So yes, I kind of hit this goal, but like external reasons have kind of prevented me from doing it more. Reading more classics. I only read 1 classic in this bunch. I have a lot of classics that I bought, and you can check out my haul from the spring because it's big. But I bought a lot of classics. I did not read a lot of classics, and that's completely my fault. And as for reading diversely, in my spring TBR and goals, I said that my goal was, it was really low bar, I was reading 10 to 15% of my books this season being diverse reads. I surpassed that goal. It was at 29%. 5 of the books that I read, was it 5? Yes, 5 of the books that I read this season more diverse in some manner. I feel really good about that. It's still not like a great number, but I'm glad to have surpassed my 10 to 15% because I really wanted to be in the 25 to 50%, and that's where I got. And some of these I read intentionally. I was like, I'm reading a lot of, like white authors. I need to read more diversely. And some of them it just kind of happened naturally, and that's good too. But now that we have done some statistics, we're going to dive right into the huge pile of books sitting next to me, and I'm going to tell you what I read this season. Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This was my first read of the season, and a little out of season considering it's sort of like a Halloween-y, autumn-y book, but it was amazing. It is about Yadriel, who wants to basically prove himself to his family, and in doing so ends up getting himself wrapped up with the mystery of this boy that he went to school with who he's found the ghost of and is dead, and he's trying to uncover what happened to him while also look for his cousin. It's also a love story. The boy who's dead, his name is Julian, and Julian and Yadriel have a romance, and it is great. It's got enough angst to really just like make me happy, and it's also a really sweet ending. You've probably seen this book around. It's very popular. I gave this one 5 stars. I know I said I wasn't going to say it like that below, but this is definitely one of my new favorite books. Aiden Thomas is definitely an author that I'm going to keep looking out for. His most recent book, I wasn't like super sold on. I'm not a big Peter Pan retelling fan, so I will probably skip it for now, but yes, great writer. I will also say, if you don't know this about me, I am a huge Voltron fan, specifically a huge Clance shipper, and this, I know Aiden Thomas ships Clance, and this fulfilled a lot of like Clance vibes for me in a really great way, so also bonus. Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. This is the second book in her most recent Shadowhunter Chronicles, The Last Hours. It is the like second chronologically as well. Like this Last Hours are the second chronological Shadowhunter series. There's a lot. I did a whole reading vlog for this, and it's got most of my thoughts, so go check that out. I'll link it up above and down below. Basically, it picks up where the last book ended. Well, no, that's not true. I mean, it does and it doesn't. Like, it picks up those threads and like steps forward a little bit in time, so it's not like a huge gap in between, and mostly feels very cohesive. Loved it, thought it was great. Yes. The first of the Bridgerton books, The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. I really disliked this book. I think easily this is the worst one in the series, and I had heard that going into the series, which is why I didn't let it be a deterrent. But my god, it was awful. And the books get a little better, but not that much. You might have seen the show. You probably saw the show. The show is 10 times better. Basically, it's about Daphne and Simon. She is on the marriage market, but not seen as very marriageable by most of the men in society. And Simon is not eager to be on the marriage market. So they kind of team up. They agree that they're going to fake date, and hopefully that will make her seem more marriageable and him less marriageable. And of course they fall in love along the way. It is a very typical Regency romance. I think my biggest issue is the consent violations. In fact, that is my biggest issue with the entire series, which seems just full of consent violations. Love it! Like I said, this is easily the worst book that I read this season. Hands down. If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler by Italo Calvino, and I actually tabbed this one. I don't know if you can see in the video, but I loved this book to death. It is a book about books and about reading and about stories, and it is a book with like a bunch of different books in it and also a frame story, and it talks to you, and it is amazing. And describing this book is very hard. As succinctly as I can, you are the protagonist, and you are set in the frame story. You have just picked up a book called If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler, which is Italo Calvino's new novel, and you are ready to start reading. At the end of the first section, you find out, oh wait, something's wrong with this book. There's a misprinting, so you go back to the bookstore to try to get a new copy, and basically you keep finding issues with every book you pick up. Each book leads to a new book. You get all of these stories that are connected but aren't connected, and it is just phenomenal. Definitely one of my new favorites. It is really funny. It is really clever. It really reached me on this deep, like, satisfying reader level. I love it so much. I have seen so many people say this is a book you should read if you love books. I completely agree. I also would caution, it is not necessarily confusing, but sometimes you just have to let it take you away with it. Just don't think too hard as you're reading it, because I think if you're looking for deep or not deep, but if you're looking for strong connections in between every storyline, you're going to find them, but they're not necessarily going to be satisfying, which is what you might be looking for, and this book is satisfying in very different ways. Oh look, it's another Bridgerton. The Viscount Who Loved Me. This is book 2. This is Antony's story. I am very excited for season 2, and I do appreciate that I've read this book in advance so that I can think about what might be happening in season 2, how they might do certain things, and I'll be very happy to be able to compare and contrast to the show when it comes out. The book was really bad. Of them all, this one and book 3 had the most like chemistry between characters that actually got me excited, and I did feel a bit like, oh, this is a guilty pleasure type read as I was reading them. Again, a lot of consent violations, especially one scene that really upset me. It's not as extremely violating as the scene in The Duke and I, but it was still enough that I was like, this is awful. I hate this. I don't like Antony, in the books at least. Basically, Antony is decided he's finally going to get married, and he sets his eyes on Edwina Sheffield. However, her older sister Kate is very protective and kind of gets in the way, and the two end up being entangled in this like enemies to lovers type romance. I will say it does a decent job with enemies to lovers. Like I said, the chemistry there is really good, and I did like the general arc of their story. I also like the inevitable like getting together scene. I really liked that. Legendborn by Tracy Deonn is probably the best YA urban fantasy to come out ever. Ish. I really love the Shadowhunter books. Super nostalgic is the reason. I think had I read this at the same time I was getting into Shadowhunters, obviously it didn't exist at the same time, but if it had, I think this one I would have been like, oh, this is a much better one because it's just so good. I listened to it on audiobook and read it, but mostly on audiobook, and I think audiobook is the way to go. I'll put the narrator's name down below because she did a phenomenal job. She brought this alive to me so well. She also managed to pronounce a lot of those harder Welsh names, which I 100% appreciate. This, okay, not only is it like urban fantasy, but it's got a little bit of dark academia vibes to it, and it's also got like these two very distinct textures to the storytelling, because there is a King Arthur aspect to it, which has this sort of dark, moody, the dark academia type aesthetic to it, and then it's also got this witchy aspect, which is much more cottagecore, I guess, in some way. Not quite. It's a little more frenetic energy, more powerful and empowering energy than the King Arthur stuff does, but I would have thought those two things do not match well. This book does it so phenomenally well. Like, this book is just, like, people said it was good. People said it was amazing. People did not lie. It is amazing. Quick descriptor, it is about Bree Matthews. Her mother has just passed away and she's just started a new program. It is sort of like a high schoolers at college program, like a live-in university, early university admission type program. She started it there, so she is a teenager, which I really liked. The setting being college, because I could relate to that, but her still being a teenager and having like teenage problems, I really liked that. This book also deals with trauma really well. This book is just great, okay? This book is just great. So Bree has just started at this new program, and she gets involved with the basically modern day Knights of the Round Table and is sort of inserting herself into their society to find out what happened with her mother, because she thinks that this organization had something to do with her mother's death, or at least covering up her mother's death. So good. Not my favorite book I read this season, but my second favorite book I read this season. I think I can say that easily. I keep like hand selling it at work, or like trying to at least, because it's just so good. Bluettes by Maggie Nielsen. This is sort of poetry, sort of essays, sort of some third thing. It is a collection of basically different paragraphs that are all about blue. Not the color, sort of the feeling, sort of both. A lot of things. It's dealing with trauma, it's dealing with heartbreak, it's dealing with art and creativity, and it is a very cool book, and it resonated with me on some levels, but I don't think I was the proper audience for it. I think that different audiences are going to radiate a lot stronger with the book. So yeah, for me, it was like, okay, I can definitely see the merit, and objectively, I think it was very beautiful and very good. This is How You Lose the Time Warp by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Motar. This is the Illumicrate edition, so it's got both hardcovers in red and blue. This I had seen so many mixed reviews for. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. If you're looking for a sort of quick, sapphic sci-fi story, definitely pick this up. It's fantastic. It is written as like a series of letters that Blue and Red, who are both special agents for like time organizations, and it's two like time organizations that are competing with each other and like trying to get their own timeline, their own future, their own reality set. So it's agents from each of those, and they are writing letters to each other, and they start as very antagonistic while also being respectful, because they're like, I see what you're doing and it's great, but like did you see what I did? And it slowly becomes a love story. It reminded me so much of, if you ever read collections of letters between two women from like history, and historians are like, oh, they're just really close gal pals, but like, no, you know, they're not. They're like in love. It's very clear, but people are afraid to say that sometimes. It read a lot like those kinds of letters, and it was just beautiful, and I strongly recommend it. I think those mixed reviews have turned a lot of people off of these or this book, but it is 100% worth your time, and it doesn't take a lot of time, and you will be delighted. The Third Bridgerton, An Offer from a Gentleman. This is Benedict's story, Benedict and Sophie. This is probably the season I'm most excited to see on screen, just because I love the trope. It's a very Cinderella trope, and I love that. Basically, Sophie is the bastard daughter of a lord or something like that, and after he dies, she ends up being treated like Cinderella, as just like a maid in the house. She runs away, goes to a masquerade ball, meets Benedict Bridgerton. He falls in love with her instantly, which is a trope I do not mind when it comes to romance novels. But then she disappears, and he spends some time looking for her and then decides he's never going to find her. I guess love's over for him. She ends up in a very different position, and it's about a year later, I think their two paths end up combining again. He does not remember her because she's not wearing the mask or anything, but she remembers him very clearly, and they end up having to live in pretty close quarters. And yes, it's a little bit of balance of her wondering, should I tell him? Him wondering, is it okay for me to love her even though she's lower class? Like, all this stuff. Guilty pleasure aspects were there. Like, I was actually drawn to that romance. But again, a lot of consent violations. Not an okay series. I cannot wait till you all see my reading vlog for the series, because it has been months in the making, and it is just me getting angrier and angrier at these books. First Become Ashes by K.M. Spara. I loved Docile. That was one of my favorite books of last year, so of course I had First Become Ashes pre-ordered for a very long time, and it is not a disappointment at all. First of all, this cover is beautiful. But this book follows several characters, actually. Mainly it follows Lark. He has been told his entire life that he is a chosen one type person, and that he's got to help rid the world of monsters. Before he's able to actually go out into the world, though, his whole world is shattered, because it turns out he is just living in a cult and been lied to his entire life, and that is something he has to grapple with and come to terms with over the course of the story. And over the course of the story, he goes on a quest with a completely regular person who is like, oh, you're that guy from the news. Yes, I will go on a quest with you, because what if monsters are real? So Kelvin and Lark go on this quest. It also follows Kane, which is Lark's lover, I guess. Basically his like partner in all the monster hunting, and Kane left first, and Kane is the one who actually turned all of the evidence into the authorities. And so Lark is dealing with the fallout of how does he trust this person that he trusted so much, and all that. And there's also Darren, who is Lark's sibling, and they have been sort of given the shorter end of the stick in regards to them or their sibling, and they're actually okay with the cult being broken down, and they have to kind of deal with, in a very different way, what reality now means for them, and them actually being quite okay with it. And yeah, anyway, this book, it's really good. I did a reading vlog, so I'll put that up as well. Super great book, super great book. The Light of the Midnight Stars by Rena Rossner. This is the only arc that I read this season. It was okay. In some ways it was super beautiful and moving, and in other ways it was not. I think similar to Bluets, I was just not the proper audience, or I just did not go into it with the proper idea of what it was. It had been sold to me as fantasy, and it's not. It has fantastical elements to it, but I think it is more accurate to say it is like fairy tale on the lighter end of fairy. It is steeped very heavily in Jewish history and folklore, and that was really interesting and very awesome to read about. But because it was advertised to me as a fantasy, I was expecting fantasy elements, when really all the fantasy elements in here pretty much just correlate to metaphors. I was going to do a full review of it. I don't think I'm going to anymore. Too much time has just passed since I actually read it, and I didn't have time to sit down and work on a review of it, so that is completely my bad. It was well written. I think that the structure of it was very strange. It followed a pattern and then it stopped following the pattern and picked up a new pattern, but the new pattern seemed just as like there as the other one. Neither of them seemed intentional in the order they were going, so that was kind of like hard for me to get behind and a little jarring as a reader. This pattern meant that like sometimes characters would have chapters and I was like, why is this character getting a voice at this moment? Like, they're not adding anything. I think the ending was a lot stronger than the beginning of the book, because the ending does this sort of generational fairy tale thing, which I really like. There are definitely other books that have done it, and I'm trying to think desperately of a name. Ava Lavender does it really well, where it's a sort of like generational fairy tale. And this sort of leans into it in the end, and I really liked that. I wish that the whole narrative had been a little closer to that, although that would have been a very different book. So that's not quite fair of me to say. Overall, 3.5. I think this is going to be an amazing book for some people. And I think if you go into it knowing it is not super fantastical, you'll probably enjoy it a lot more. It's advertised a lot as like for fans of Uprooted or Spinning Silver, and I think maybe a little bit. It's too based in history for that. I think it's more just a fan for people who like history retellings, because that's what this is, especially like early Eastern European history retellings, and I know that there is an audience out there for that. I didn't talk about what this book was about. Yes. So it takes place in Hungary in, what year is it? In 5120, so long time ago, and it follows 3 sisters. Their father is a rabbi, and they each have powers, sort of. Hannah is really good at growing plants. Sarah can basically control fire. And Lavana can see the future in the stars. Story, like I said, very steeped in Jewish history. So at this time, it wasn't particularly safe to be a Jew in this part of the world. And they're definitely dealing with that. They're also dealing with, there are romantic aspects, and they each have like a romance. But they're dealing less with the romance than how they and their partner fit into the larger narrative of what their life is going to be, which I do appreciate. And yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. Super steeped in history is like as helpful as I can be. I think telling you what the fantastical elements are, because they are so subtle, isn't worth it, because you'll read them and you'll pick up on it and you'll know what it's trying to be a metaphor for, I think, if you just come across it more naturally. Oh, what's that? Another Bridgerton? Yes, it is. This is book 4, Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. This is Colin's story, and I don't think this is a spoiler because they put it on the cover and they talk about it in the description, so we're just gonna say it's Penelope and Colin's story. Of the ones I read, this has no consent violations, so on that level it is the best. The romance is fine. I really like Penelope's parts. Colin's parts kind of bored me. I didn't think he had much character. But I can easily say of all the Bridgertons I read, this one is the best. And honestly, you could probably just skip ahead to this one. It's pretty cathartic to see their happy ending. Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress by Dai Shiji. This book was amazing. I read this because a coworker recommended it, and I do not regret it one bit. It was amazing. It's super short, so it's pretty easy to read. And it's surprisingly funny. It's dark, but it's also surprisingly funny. It is about 2 boys, and this is based on the author's own lived experience. It's about 2 boys who, during China's re-education program, are put into that re-education program. They're pulled out of their city lives, their family lives, and they're put in this very small mountain town where things are very different and they have to work, and, you know, Western things are just banned. While they're there, they meet a girl, the little seamstress. She is the daughter of a very wealthy merchant, and oftentimes she's left alone, so the boys spend a lot of time with her. And the boy starts dating her, although they both have very unique relationships with her. And they also discover a bunch of Western books that have not been destroyed, and they start reading them, and it just changes their lives completely, and it also changes her life completely. And this is the story of that change, and also of them just growing up in general. Even under these conditions, they are still very typical young teenagers. Definitely recommend Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. It's not a new book. It's been out for a very long time, and I've never seen it before. This coworker recommended it to me, but it's amazing. The Lost Spells by Robert Macfarlane and Jackie Morris. This is a book of poetry. and it is beautiful poetry with beautiful art. I talked a lot about it in the reading vlogs when I was doing it, so I will try to link one above or below. I don't know if I've like overdone my amount of links at this point. It's just poems, I mean, that are like spells, and they recommend you read them aloud, and I did. They're all nature-based, especially animal and tree-based, and it was beautiful. Every single one is gorgeous. I wouldn't say they're necessarily like the deepest poems. It's no Emily Dickinson, but I think even if you, like, I'm not a huge poetry reader, it's something I'm working on, and I think that this is the kind of book that is good for someone who is just looking to get into it and isn't a big fan of like internet poetry. Like, I'm just not a big fan of internet poetry. I think this is a really good starting place. This is the only reread on this list, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I reread this because I bought this edition because this is the perfect edition to read this book in. This is like the dark academia text, like the dark academia text, and it is about basically a group of students who end up killing one of their friends who is part of this group, and the first half of the novel is like leading up to it, and the second half of the novel is leading away from it. And that is not a spoiler because you literally start the book knowing that this has happened. It is so good. It brought me so much anxiety on the reread. I still love it. I don't love it as much, or I should say I don't love it in the same way. I guess at the first time I read it, I gave it like 5 stars. I think it's a bit more of like 4.5 stars at this point, just because I'm in a different part of my life, I think. But definitely good. Definitely a book like I recommend you reading. It's more thriller than literature, but it kind of straddles that line. Oh, what's this? What's this? Another Bridgerton. This is the last Bridgerton I managed to read this season. I'm almost done. This is a book, was it 5? To Sir Philip with Love. This is Eloise's story. This was not the worst, but if you don't count the first book, it was the worst just because it was really boring. There goes the pile. It was really boring. Eloise is the character that I love on the show. The books give her almost nothing to do, ever. Her trait is that she writes letters. Very cool. So she's writing letters to Sir Philip Crane, and he's like, I'm widowed, want to be my wife? And so she goes out there and is like, I'll consider it, and they have like zero chemistry. I was bored like the entire time, although it did. To be fair, it had the best sex scene in the series so far. So I will give you that, To Sir Philip with Love. And it is a total coincidence that this is the last book I read and also my favorite book of the season, and that is Mr. Impossible by Maggie Stiefvater. I will have it linked above because I did a reading vlog for this one. It was amazing. This book blew my mind. It takes place right after Call Down the Hawk. I don't want to say anything about it because I don't want to risk spoiling anything. It is an experience unlike any other. I have only done this twice before, given more than 5 stars to books. Only twice before. But this is a 5.5 star read. I am not even kidding. Blew my mind. It touched me on such a deep level. How do I breathe now that my air has been finished off kind of situation? It was so very good. Blew my frickin' mind. So that is my wrap up. Like I said, 17 books. I think I did that as quickly as I possibly could. This is still probably going to end up being a very long video, so if you stuck around this long, thank you very much. I love having you here. I love your support, and if you would please subscribe, I would really appreciate that. Since you're watching this and I've done my wrap up, that means that my summer TBR is right around the corner. We'll be posting very soon, so keep an eye out for that. There are so many good summery books that I really want to read this year, so I'm excited to put that video up. This is where I must leave you. I hope you are doing well. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you are reading a wonderful book. I will see you next week. Bye-bye!